Good morning again. I'm Maurice Barratt and I'm here on a Friday to give you more food for thought. Trust you've had a blessed week. I have. Been married 34 years this week and I'm so blessed that my wife and I are still in the ministry. We've been working together for over 50 years now. 55 years, I think. Well, I've been thinking this week. Do you receive the grace of God in vain? I'm asking the question because I read a scripture that provoked me. It's from 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 1. We then as workers together with you, beseech you, we beg you, that you receive not the grace of God in vain. You know, God sends us trials and blessings for a purpose, so that we can learn his character. It's about knowing Christ, that I may know him, Paul says. And a trial really is a blessing in disguise. We don't realise it till we're through the trial, unless we fail in it. But when you come through a trial and you're victorious and you overcome, then it's a blessing in disguise because you learn more about God's character. But a blessing's a trial in disguise. God blesses us, and that's another test to see if we can handle it, because you don't need God as much when you're being blessed. We need him in the trials and the persecution and the misunderstandings and the rejection. When everything's going hunky-dory and we're prosperous and happy, we don't need God as much, and that's a test. Well, the trials throw us on God. In blessings, we don't need him as much. You know, if you never grieve, you'll never understand God and his character. If you're never rejected, you'll never understand God, because God's been rejected. From Genesis 1, Eve rejected him. Israel rejected him. The church have rejected him time and again. You wouldn't need revivals unless God's people had rejected him. So how can you understand God's character? How can you understand the feelings of God unless you're rejected? If you're never persecuted, you'll never understand Christ. The captain of our salvation was matured, perfected through suffering. So how will you be perfected if you won't suffer? You see, these things are good. And so many receive the grace of God in vain. Christians have lots of knowledge, but knowledge doesn't get you to know Christ. Knowledge puffeth up. Let me read what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 8 verse 1. Knowledge puffs up, but compassion edifies. You know, if you don't examine your heart when God sends you trials or blessings for correction or instruction, persecution, and if we don't take that as a stepping stone to grow more like Christ, to know him more intimately, then we're taking the grace of God in vain. There's many ways that we can take his grace in vain, but I'll just leave you with another one because of time. Another way you can fall from grace is to go back under the old covenant. Well, we're Gentiles, I am anyway, so I can't go back under the old covenant, but so many believers want to embrace the old covenant when they're Gentiles. And so many believers want to keep the ordinances of the law that were nailed to the cross when Jesus came. We're saved without the deeds of the law, Paul said. And many believers don't know the difference between the moral law of God and the ordinances. The moral law of God will stand till heaven and earth pass, Jesus said it. But the ordinances were nailed to the cross. Let me read it. Ephesians 2:15. Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make of himself of two one new man, so making peace. God broke down that middle wall of partition because the ordinance separated us from God's people. The moral laws of God are for Israel and Gentiles when they get saved. We're one. But the ordinances were only for Israel, and they were not for the Gentiles, and for us to keep them is to go back under the old covenant, and you're fallen from grace. The ordinances are all the dietary laws, the feasts, the holy days, and all the sundry divers ordinances, as my Bible says. And if you keep one, you're debtor to keep them all, including circumcision. That was an ordinance. It's not to do with morals. You see, you've got to decide what's a moral issue, and that will stand till heaven and earth pass, and what is a rule, an ordinance, an instruction, which were temporary. The law was just a temporary guide, a schoolmaster, until Jesus came. But we don't need the schoolmaster now. But the moral law of God, of course, still stands, because God doesn't change his morals. So let me read what Paul says to the Christians in Galatia. This is Galatians 5, verse 1 to 4. Stand fast, therefore, don't be moved, in the liberty where Christ has made us free, and don't be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if you're circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again that every man that is circumcised, he is debtor to do the whole law. Christ is become of no effect unto you, whosoever you are, who are justified by the law. Not the moral law, but the ordinances. You are fallen from grace. That's strong talk. Think about it anyway. I hope I've given you some food for thought this day. Have a brilliant day. Free in the grace of God, and keep thinking.